Hey there, history explorers. Today we're diving into the wild and tumultuous world of the Vietnam War. Strap in because we're about to embark on a journey through time that's more intense than a cup of Vietnamese coffee. Part 1. The French Connection. Let's set our time machine back to the 19th century. France, not content with wine, cheese, and Eiffel Tower, decided to add Vietnam to their collection, calling it French Indochina. But our hero of the day, Vietnamese nationalist Ho Chi Minh, had other plans. Trained by the Soviet Union in the 1920s, he founded the Indo-Chinese Communist Party in 1930. That's right, folks. Ho Chi Minh was building a resistance before building a resistance was cool. Part 2. World War II Chaos. Fast forward to the 1940s, World War II shook up the geopolitical Etch-a-Sketch, with Japan strolling into French Indochina in 1940. Then in 1945, Ho Chi Minh seizes the moment, declaring an independent North Vietnam. It's a big move, but the French weren't too thrilled about it, leading to a guerrilla war that started in 1946. It's like a bad breakup. Nobody wants to let go. Part 3. America joins the party. Now let's bring America into the picture. Truman, in his 1947 speech, basically said, "If communism threatens you, we got your back." And thus, the Truman Doctrine was born. America began assisting France, viewing Viet Minh as a communist threat. But the French, despite the help, faced a humiliating defeat by the Viet Minh at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, marking the end of French rule. The Vietnam War was just beginning to heat up. Part 4. The Geneva Accords. July 1954, the Geneva Accords established North and South Vietnam. It's like slicing a pizza in half, but instead of pepperoni and cheese, we've got a political and ideological divide. Ngo Dinh Diem emerges as the leader of South Vietnam, backed by the U.S., while Ho Chi Minh runs the Communist North. Things are about to get spicy, folks. Part 5. The conflict intensifies. Fast forward to May 1961, JFK sends helicopters and 400 Green Berets to South Vietnam, and suddenly we're playing a real-life game of Risk. The U.S. starts spraying Agent Orange, which, spoiler alert, is not a new soda flavor, but a toxic herbicide. All while Diem's favoritism towards South Vietnam's Catholic minority is causing some serious homegrown issues. But the conflict doesn't stop there. As the Vietnam War intensifies, the stakes become higher and the situation more complex. The U.S. presence in South Vietnam grows, with an increasing number of American troops being deployed. The U.S. military adopts a strategy of counterinsurgency, aiming to suppress the Viet Cong, the South Vietnamese communist guerrillas, and win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people. The use of Agent Orange, a powerful herbicide containing the toxic chemical dioxin, becomes a controversial aspect of the war. It is sprayed over vast areas of rural South Vietnam with the intention of destroying vegetation that provides cover and food for the Viet Cong. However, the long-term effects of Agent Orange are devastating. It not only harms the environment but also has severe health consequences for both Vietnamese civilians and U.S. military personnel exposed to it. The use of Agent Orange becomes a source of outrage and a symbol of the war's environmental and human costs. Meanwhile, Ngo Dinh Diem's favoritism towards South Vietnam's Catholic minority creates deep divisions within the country. His policies alienate the majority Buddhist population, leading to protests and demonstrations. The repression of Buddhist dissent by Diem's regime further fuels discontent and unrest. The internal strife in South Vietnam adds another layer of complexity to the already volatile situation. As the conflict escalates, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces continue to wage a guerrilla war against the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. The dense jungles, intricate tunnel systems, and knowledge of the terrain give the Viet Cong a significant advantage. They launch hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, and employ unconventional tactics to undermine the superior firepower of the U.S. military. The conflict takes a toll on both sides. The loss of lives and the brutality of the war become increasingly evident. The American public starts to question the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The war's televised images and reports bring the harsh reality of the conflict into living rooms across the nation, fueling anti-war sentiment and giving rise to a powerful anti-war movement. Protests, demonstrations, and acts of civil disobedience become widespread. The anti-war movement attracts people from all walks of life, including students, intellectuals, and veterans. They call for an end to the war, advocating for peace and withdrawal of U.S. forces from Vietnam. Within the U.S. military, dissent also emerges. Some soldiers become disillusioned with the war, questioning its purpose and moral justifications. Instances of fragging, the deliberate killing or injuring of officers by their own troops, occur as a result of internal resistance within the ranks. As the conflict intensifies, the Vietnam War becomes more than just a military engagement. It becomes a social, cultural, and political battleground, challenging the very fabric of American society and sparking a national soul-searching. The war's impact reverberates far beyond the battlefields of Vietnam, shaping the course of history and leaving an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of a generation. Part 6. The Escalation. In August 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident happens, and it's the geopolitical equivalent of "he started it." Allegedly, North Vietnam attacked U.S. ships, and Congress responded with the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, essentially giving President Lyndon B. Johnson a blank check for war. U.S. ground troops land in March 1965, and the war escalates. The Gulf of Tonkin incident becomes a pivotal moment in the Vietnam War, propelling the conflict into a new phase of escalation. In August 1964, reports emerge that North Vietnamese patrol boats have allegedly attacked two U.S. Navy destroyers, USS Maddox and USS Turner Joy, in the Gulf of Tonkin. These incidents, however, remain clouded in controversy and conflicting accounts. In response to the perceived threat, President Lyndon B. Johnson seeks a military response and presents a distorted narrative of the events to Congress. He asserts that the North Vietnamese attacks were unprovoked and a clear act of aggression. Congress, fueled by a combination of fear and the desire to show resolve against communism, swiftly passes the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution grants President Johnson broad powers to take any necessary measures to protect U.S. interests and repel aggression in Southeast Asia. Essentially, it becomes a blank check for the expansion of U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. With this resolution in hand, Johnson authorizes the deployment of ground troops to South Vietnam, marking a significant escalation of the war. In March 1965, the first U.S. combat troops, known as the United States Army's 9th Infantry Division, land in South Vietnam. Their arrival marks a turning point in the war as the U.S. commitment shifts from advisory and support roles to direct combat operations. The initial deployment is followed by a steady increase in troop numbers, and by the end of 1965, tens of thousands of American soldiers are on the ground. The introduction of U.S. ground troops represents a major escalation and a shift in the nature of the conflict. The U.S. military implements a conventional warfare strategy, utilizing its superior firepower and technological advantages to engage the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces in large-scale battles. This approach, however, proves challenging in the unfamiliar terrain and against an elusive enemy deeply entrenched in the Vietnamese countryside. The escalation of the war brings a surge in the number of American casualties. The U.S. military faces fierce resistance from the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces, who employ guerrilla tactics and exploit the dense jungles, tunnels, and complex terrain of Vietnam to their advantage. The high casualty rates and the prolonged nature of the war start to take a toll on the morale of U.S. troops and deepen the disillusionment back home. With the war escalating, anti-war sentiment grows within the United States. Protests, demonstrations, and acts of civil disobedience become more widespread. Students, activists, and intellectuals take to the streets to voice their opposition to the war. The anti-war movement gains momentum and becomes a prominent force in shaping public opinion and challenging the government's policies. Internationally, the Vietnam War sparks controversy and division. It becomes a symbol of the global struggle between the forces of communism and those of democracy and capitalism. The war intensifies Cold War tensions and draws the attention of the world as nations take sides, either supporting or opposing U.S. involvement in Vietnam. As the war escalates, so does the devastation and the humanitarian toll. The aerial bombing campaigns, the use of powerful weaponry, and the destruction of infrastructure caused significant civilian casualties and displacement. The environmental impact of the war, including the defoliation caused by Agent Orange and the contamination of waterways, further compounds the human suffering and leaves long-lasting scars on the landscape. The escalation of the Vietnam War brings about a deepening divide within American society and fuels the anti-war movement domestically and internationally. The conflict enters a new and increasingly challenging phase, leaving an indelible mark on the history of both Vietnam and the United States. Part 7. The Tet Offensive. January 1968, the Tet Offensive. It's not a new dance move, folks. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces launched surprise attacks on cities throughout South Vietnam. Although it's a military failure for the North, it shocks the U.S. and its allies. The Tet Offensive is like crashing a party uninvited and leaving everyone wondering what just happened. Part 8. The Anti-War Movement. But wait, there's more. The war isn't just fought on the battlefield. Back home, the anti-war movement is gaining momentum. People are taking to the streets demanding an end to the war. It's like a giant wave of protest, shaking the very foundation of American society. From peaceful demonstrations to sit-ins and even draft card burnings, the anti-war movement becomes a powerful force to reckon with. As the Vietnam War continued to escalate, opposition to the conflict grew among various segments of American society. The anti-war movement encompassed a diverse range of individuals and groups, including students, intellectuals, activists, veterans, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens. They expressed their dissent through protests, demonstrations, teach-ins, and other forms of civil disobedience. One of the key factors that fueled the anti-war movement was the high number of casualties and the increasing realization of the human cost of the war. As news coverage and images of wounded and dead soldiers, as well as civilian casualties, reached the American public, public opinion began to shift against the war. The loss of American lives and the perceived futility of the conflict raised questions about the moral justification and strategic purpose of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Students played a significant role in the anti-war movement. College campuses became hotbeds of activism, with student-led protests and sit-ins demanding an end to the war. Organizations such as Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, and the Vietnam Moratorium Committee mobilized students across the country, organizing mass demonstrations and advocating for peace. The anti-war movement also found support within religious communities. Many religious leaders spoke out against the war, drawing on their moral and ethical beliefs to condemn the violence and destruction. Prominent figures like Martin Luther King Jr., a prominent civil rights leader, publicly criticized the war and called for a focus on social justice and equality rather than military intervention. The anti-war movement was not confined to specific regions or political affiliations. It transcended party lines, with individuals from both the Democratic and Republican parties voicing their opposition to the war. Criticism of the war extended to the highest levels of government, with some members of Congress challenging the administration's policies and calling for a re-evaluation of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The movement gained further momentum in 1968, a pivotal year in the war and American politics. The Tet Offensive, which revealed the scale of the conflict and the inability to achieve a decisive victory, led to increased skepticism about the government's claims of progress. The assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy further heightened the sense of disillusionment and the desire for change. Public sentiment against the war was amplified by cultural expressions. Music became a powerful medium for anti-war messages, with songs like "Blowin' in the Wind" by Bob Dylan, "Fortunate Son" by Creedence Clearwater Revival, and "Give Peace a Chance" by John Lennon becoming anthems for the anti-war movement. Artists, writers, and filmmakers also used their platforms to critique the war and expose its human toll. The anti-war movement's impact extended beyond domestic politics. It influenced public opinion globally, shaping international perceptions of the United States and its foreign policies. The movement resonated with anti-war sentiment in other countries, fostering solidarity and encouraging opposition to U.S. involvement in Vietnam. While the anti-war movement did not achieve an immediate end to the war, its influence was undeniable. It contributed to the growing pressure on the government to change its approach and led to policy shifts such as the withdrawal of troops and the pursuit of peace negotiations. The movement's lasting legacy can be seen in the lessons learned from the war and the impact it had on subsequent U.S. foreign policy decisions. Part 9. Nixon's Secret Plan. Now let's talk about President Richard Nixon. In 1968, he campaigned on a promise to end the war and bring peace to Vietnam. He even had a secret plan, or so he claimed. But as it turns out, that plan wasn't so secret after all. Nixon gradually withdraws U.S. troops while increasing bombing campaigns in Cambodia and Laos. It's like a magic trick where the hand distracts you while something else is happening behind the scenes. Part 10. The Pentagon Papers. Enter the Pentagon Papers, a top-secret study revealing the truth about U.S. involvement in Vietnam. These classified documents are leaked to the public, exposing a web of lies and deceit. It's like pulling back the curtain and realizing the Wizard of Oz isn't as powerful as he seems. The revelations further fuel the anti-war sentiment and erode public trust in the government. In 1971, the world was about to witness a bombshell revelation that would make even the most riveting spy novels pale in comparison. Enter the Pentagon Papers, a top-secret study commissioned by the U.S. Department of Defense. This classified report was like the James Bond of government secrets, packed with juicy information about the Vietnam War. It was the ultimate tell-all that no one saw coming. Picture this: a clandestine operative named Daniel Ellsberg, armed with a copy machine and a rebellious spirit, risked it all to leak these top-secret documents to the press. It was like a high-stakes game of cat and mouse between Ellsberg and the government. Will he get caught? Will he be hailed as a hero or branded a traitor? Cue the suspenseful music. When the Pentagon Papers hit the headlines, it was like a cinematic explosion. The documents revealed a web of deceit, exposing government lies and manipulation surrounding the Vietnam War. It was as if the war took on a whole new dimension, revealing the backstage drama that unfolded behind the scenes. Think of it as the plot twist of all plot twists, leaving the public in awe and demanding answers. Now, here comes the humor. Amidst the serious revelations, there were quirky moments that added a touch of comedy to this extraordinary tale. Imagine government officials frantically scrambling to contain the fallout, like characters in a slapstick comedy, slipping on banana peels of their own making. The Pentagon Papers became the talk of the town, fueling debates, late-night comedy sketches, and conspiracy theories. It was history in the making with a side of laughter, proving that even in the midst of intense revelations, humor has its place. The Pentagon Papers not only shook the foundations of government secrecy, but also played a pivotal role in shaping public opinion and fueling anti-war sentiment. This roller coaster ride of leaks and revelations reminded us that truth can be stranger than fiction. So buckle up and brace yourself for the wild twists and turns that the Vietnam War had in store, because the Pentagon Papers were just the tip of the iceberg in this captivating historical saga. Part 11. Peace Talks and Withdrawal. As the war drags on, peace talks are held in Paris. Negotiations are like a delicate dance, with both sides trying to find common ground. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords are signed, and a ceasefire is declared. U.S. troops start to come home, and it's like a collective sigh of relief. However, the fighting between North and South Vietnam continues, leading to a complex and uncertain future. Part 12. The Fall of Saigon. April 1975. Saigon falls. It's a pivotal moment that marks the end of the war. North Vietnamese forces capture Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, and reunification is realized. Helicopters evacuate Americans and some South Vietnamese, reminiscent of scenes from a Hollywood blockbuster. The war is over, but its impact lingers. But let's not forget our sense of humor amidst all the excitement. As the victorious troops enter the city, they're met with a surprise that they didn't expect: a local zoo. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, elephants, tigers, and monkeys roaming the streets alongside tanks and soldiers. It's a scene straight out of a wild circus. Talk about a surreal welcome party. And just like that, our roller coaster ride through the Vietnam War comes to an exhilarating end. It was a journey filled with twists, turns, and unexpected moments. We've witnessed the resilience of the Vietnamese people, the geopolitical maneuverings, and the triumphs and tragedies that defined this chapter in history. Part 13. The Legacy. The Vietnam War leaves behind a profound and lasting legacy. It was a war that divided nations and tested the resolve of individuals. The scars, both physical and emotional, are still felt to this day. It forever changed the way we think about war, media coverage, and government accountability. The Vietnam War serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of conflict and the importance of learning from history. For North Vietnam and the Viet Cong, it is estimated that around 1 million to 1.1 million soldiers and civilians lost their lives during the war. This includes combatants killed in action, as well as civilian casualties resulting from bombings, fighting, and other war-related incidents. On the side of South Vietnam, it is estimated that approximately 254,000 to 313,000 soldiers were killed, along with a significant number of civilian casualties. These figures include both military personnel and civilians who were caught in the crossfire or affected by the war's consequences. The United States suffered approximately 58,200 military fatalities during the Vietnam War. These are the official figures reported by the U.S. Department of Defense, representing those who were killed in action or died of other war-related causes. And there you have it, the roller coaster ride that was the Vietnam War. From the French Connection to America's involvement, the Tet Offensive, the anti-war movement, Nixon's secret plan, the Pentagon Papers, peace talks, the fall of Saigon, and its enduring legacy, it was a whirlwind of events and emotions. The Vietnam War left an indelible mark on the world and continues to shape our understanding of war and its consequences. Join us next time as we continue exploring the fascinating chapters of history. Make sure to subscribe for more, and until then, keep exploring and stay curious.